So good afternoon and welcome to the Governors for Schools Conference 2022, sponsored by the Institution of Engineering and Technology. My name's Oliver Keane and I'm really pleased to welcome you here today on behalf of Governors for Schools. In this session, we're looking at the ongoing SEND review and what it means for schools and boards. And to do that, we're joined by Francesca Paul and Sarah Bull of the Key and Jenny Tosh, who's a trustee of Children First. Before I hand over to Francesca, I have a few quick pieces of housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you via email after the conference by the end of the week, we hope. The session is also CPD accredited by the CPD certification service. And so you can get a complimentary certificate to confirm your attendance after the conference. If you'd like one, you'll just need to fill in the post-webinar survey and confirm you're happy for us to share your name and email with the CPD certification service, who will then issue your certificate and send it to you by email. This can take up to 28 days though. You're welcome to post any questions you have in the Q&A feature and we'll answer as many as we can. It's a short 30-minute session, so hopefully we'll get to some questions at the end, but we can't promise anything. You can join the conversation as well on Twitter at #GFSConference2022 and share your views there. So without any further delay, I'll hand over to Francesca.
Hi, I'm Francesca. As mentioned, I'm a former deputy head and current sub-editor at The Key, and I'm joined by my colleague Sarah, who is senior content editor and also a governor. And she's here today to answer any questions you may have. I'm here today to give you a very quick introduction to Special Educational Needs and Disabilities, SEND, your role as governors and the SEND review. Next slide, please. I just want to start by drawing your attention to the SEND Code of Practice, which sets the framework for the way that LAs and schools support pupils with SEND. It covers young people up to the age of 25 and sets out legal requirements and statutory guidance. Now, it is a huge document, so you don't need to read it in any detail, but of course, if you want to, that is great. But you just need to be aware that it exists and it sets out all the requirements. So if you have any questions or queries, it's your go-to document. Next slide, please. So what is SEND and how prevalent is it? A child or a young person has SEND if they need some sort of special educational provision to be made for them, if they have a significantly greater difficulty in learning than the majority of their peers, or if they have a disability which hinders them from making use of the facilities provided for their peers. As you can see from this graphic, there are 4 categories or areas of need that pupils with SEND fall into. Those are communication and interaction, cognition and learning, sensory and/or physical, and social, emotional, and mental health needs. It's worth noting that pupils can have needs that fall into more than one category. And the most common type of need for those with an EHCP, or an education healthcare plan, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, is autistic spectrum disorder. And for those who require SEND support, it's speech, language, and communication needs. So how many children are affected? As we can see from these statistics, just under 1.5 million pupils in England have SEN, which is an increase of 77,000 from 2021. Further, both the number of pupils with an EHC plan and the number of pupils with SEN support have increased. Now, this is an upward trend which has been rising since 2016, which really highlights the importance of reviewing our current provision, which I'll come on to on the end. Next slide, please. So what does this mean in practice for schools? Well, they should be offering 2 levels of support. Firstly, through their own SEND support, and then if needed, through the education healthcare plan, which I mentioned previously. SEND support is the first wave of provision schools will put in place to support pupils with SEND. This includes a focus on quality first teaching, differentiation, and interventions, and these should be led by the teacher in conjunction with the SENCO. Provision should be offered in what we call the graduated approach, which is a repeated cycle of assess, plan, do, review. If the pupil has needs that can't be met by the school or the pupil's parents will apply for the EHC plan. EHCPs should be individual to each child, and the process for creating one is led by the LA. An EHCP is a legal document that covers the child's needs, the benefit or difference the support will make to the child, and the support that the local authority must provide. I just want to take this moment to provide further assurance that you won't be involved in this, but it's really good for you to know. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for your board as a whole? Whilst your governing board can delegate these functions to a committee, an individual governor, or the head teacher, it's still your board's responsibility to make sure that these following functions are carried out. You must do your best to make sure that a child with SEND gets all the support they need. This means doing everything you can to meet children and young people's SEND and ensuring that they engage in the same activities as their peers. You must inform parents about the SEND provision and review the SEND information report. You must cooperate with the local authority in reviewing the provision that is available locally and developing the local offer. You must make sure that your school has a qualified teacher designated as SENCO. You need to pay extra attention to safeguarding, making sure your child protection policy reflects the challenges that children with SEND can face, and accurately record provision for pupils with SEND in your school. Your board also needs to make sure that your school's SEND information report and policy for pupils with SEND is published on your website. It should already be there. Your job is just to make sure that it is, make sure it's accurate, and make sure that it's up to date. Next slide, please. If you're the SEND Link governor, in short, your role is to monitor that your school is providing for pupils with SEND, ensuring that they have access to good quality, inclusive education, and to be your board specialist on all things SEND. Your exact duties will of course depend on your individual school, but this slide just gives an indication of the sort of tasks that you might be responsible for. Remember, you're not acting alone. Everyone on your governing board is responsible for SEND. Next slide, please. So, on to the SEND review. Hope you remember those statistics that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. As I said, those really highlight the importance of this review. Just to give a brief overview to the background, the SEND review was launched in response to growing frustration about the SEND system. The government consulted with children, young people, parents, teachers, and local government workers in an attempt to understand what was creating these challenges in the system and set out a plan for improvement. And alternative provision, which is full-time education organised by LAs for pupils who, because of exclusion, illness, or other reasons, wouldn't otherwise receive suitable education, have become an integral part of the SEND system. So it's worth noting that this is also included in the review. So the review found the following main problems. Firstly, that pupils with SEND have worse outcomes than their peers. Of course, they have the same aspirations as their peers, but they fall behind them at every stage of education. They're more likely to become disengaged, have poor attendance, and to be excluded. Secondly, research shows that many children or young people felt they hadn't received enough tailored support for their needs. Families of children with SEND spoke about the impact trying to secure SEND provision had on them, including the financial costs and the mental health impact. Thirdly, the 2014 reforms placed significant emphasis on local discretion. This was the expectation that the LA work closely with local EHCE partners, parents, and carers. This resulted in significant inconsistencies in how SEND provision is delivered in practice across the country. At the most extreme end of the spectrum, a child or a young person may be effectively supported in a mainstream school in one area of the country, but will be placed in a specialist setting if they are living in another area. And finally, despite investment from the government, outcomes and experiences for children with SEND aren't improving. The system has become financially unsustainable, with investment being outstripped by spending, which has left 2/3 of LAs with growing deficits. This graphic here illustrates the vicious cycle of late intervention, low confidence across the system, and inefficient resources allocation that's driving the challenges. Next slide, please. So the Green Paper aims to improve the system in 4 main ways. Next slide, please. And just before I kind of talk about these in greater detail, I want to stress that none of this is legislation or gone through Parliament yet, but it's just for you to be aware about the potential changes that might be coming in the sector. So firstly, the Green Paper aims to improve the system through establishing a single national SEND and AP system. The review concludes that there is a need for much greater consistency in how needs are identified and supported through initiatives such as introducing a standardised and digitised EHCP process and template. Secondly, they call for excellent provision from early years to adulthood. They aim to achieve this through initiatives such as increasing investment, improving mainstream provision through excellent teacher training and building expertise and leadership through the new SENCO National Professional Qualification. Thirdly, they call for a reformed and integrated role for AP. They want to achieve this by setting robust standards focused on the progress and reintegration of young people into mainstream education. And finally, they want to reform in system roles, accountabilities, and funding. This is through initiatives such as delivering clarity on the roles and responsibilities of everyone who's involved in the process so that everyone can do their role effectively. The aim of all this is that hopefully together we can ensure that every child and young person with SEND and those in AP can thrive and be well prepared for adult life. Thank you for your time, and I would now like to pass over to Jenny.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think I'm unmuted now. I'm going to talk to you very much about a personal view, and my personal view doesn't come from me being a teacher or an Ofsted inspector or an educated lead in the local authority. It comes from being a working governor and trustee, and possibly from being a granny too, although that's probably a slightly biased viewpoint. But what I want to say to you is about the things that I think will help you, and hopefully you can take back to your school and setting, whether you're a primary, secondary governor or in a special school or mainstream school. And although I was introduced at the beginning by Ollie as being a chair of trustees in one, I'm actually, I work in, I'm a chair of governors in a special school, and I work in 3 other academy trusts, either as chair, as vice chair, or governing chair of their governing body. So at the moment I have a lot of experience, which is why I call myself a working governor. Could I have the first slide, please? I'm not going to read my slides. I'm going to point out a few things and hope that they will give you some ideas that you can take back to your school and setting. And really, this first slide is very much about me and some thoughts about getting it right for pupils with SEND and their families. As I say, I'm not going to read them all, but I wanted to point out a couple to you. So the third one down, I think, is important, which is if we can get it right for pupils with SEND, we can get it right for anyone. And I say this because often the children and their families have had so many complex problems to address, so many issues before they've even got to school. And then the actual process of barriers to learning, of overcoming those barriers, has meant that it really is a moral imperative for us to get it right for pupils with SEND and their families. And the last thing I wanted to point out on this slide is very much about me and how I believe things should work. And I've always believed it's through effective and supportive partnerships that we will succeed in our achieving our aims. And again, relating that back to pupils with SEND, they've already had experience of partnerships that may have not been effective all the way through. Partnerships with health, with social services, maybe with education, their families, trying to navigate the SEN assessment process and the system. And as I say, they're not always the most effective impact for them. And we do really have to look at that in terms of getting it right for them and their families. Thank you. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so relating back to what Francesca was saying and our response to the SEND review, it's not legislation, but it is about some of the things that we are doing and some of us doing extremely well at the moment. But the important thing for us is that we have to know that. We have to know that we can tell what our practice is like, because how can we say what we're going to do for the SEND review unless we have a really clear understanding as governors and trustees what our school and setting does now? So those are some of the questions that we should be asking ourselves. And, you know, it's true. I can't disagree that practice is inconsistent across the country. Practice is inconsistent everywhere. So we have to have that sense of where we are within that. And if we ask these questions, we don't just evaluate what our school and setting is doing, but what we're doing as a governing body as well, and how we are as governors. How do we know that we've got the right answers? And then what do we need to do something differently? Because if we don't ask and answer these questions, Ofsted will. Not that it's a threat, but it's just a reminder. And I'll come back to Ofsted again at the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. So the first thing I think we all need to do is to audit our practice. And I'm sure you do it. So please, I'm not teaching you to suck eggs. I'm going to tell you something about the practice that we've engaged in our schools and our trusts that I'm linked to. You know, I was at a governing body meeting last night, and we were talking about the SEN information that in the head teacher's report, and we were looking at the data. And some of the things that, you know, that Francesca talked about, the increasing numbers of pupils with SEND, the reduction in resources, the fact that money doesn't go as far enough, means that we do need to know where we are, and we do need to evaluate our practice. So that slide just tells you about what you should do if you're thinking about auditing. And there's loads of audit tools around, some which you'll have to pay for, but some which you don't. And going back to my point about partnerships, one of the best way to audit and review something is to partner up with another school. If you're in a trust, that's easy because you'll have other schools, hopefully, if it's a multi-academy trust, that you can do that. And maybe that's already happening. If you can't, you could find other schools with similar circumstances to you who would appreciate a governor's review. You review them, they'll review you. Once you've done it and you've got an audit, which gives you an idea, and hopefully you've got an external view, so get somebody else in to do it with you, not just yourselves, you can then turn that into an action plan. Could I have the next slide? Thank you very much. These two slides, this slide and the following one, talk about how you should respond as all governors, and then a little bit about how you might want to respond for the governor who is the link governor for SEND, or your committee, or however you operate that role, because I know it's very different in different places. As I said, last night, we were talking in our governing body meeting how we were going to respond to this increase in need, and from the data on the head teacher's report. So one of the things that we've decided to do is to have a focus on SEND, and we use something called an in-school day. If you look down on my slide, that it's the fourth point up or fifth point on the slide. And what we do there is and a number of schools do this, so again, you might well do it. They turn one of their business meetings into an actual meeting during the day and call it an in-day, where you look at something which is a priority for your school or a focus that you've identified that needs to be addressed, so that you can get a little bit further underneath the surface and learn a little bit more about what's going on in your school. So in our in-school day that we're planning, what will happen at our next governing body meeting is that we'll have the SENCO come to give us a presentation, a bit more information than the head teacher gives in his report. And then we'll go into school and see what that SENCO has said. And I think one of the things that our SENCO is very good at saying is, when you come in, you will see. When you come in to meet my staff, you will ask, you will hear, you will see these things. So they're pointing out to us as governors the things that they want us to learn, the things that they want us to take away, so that if we have an Ofsted inspection, we're talking with one voice, we're saying the same thing, we're singing the same tune. And that's so important about inclusion and the vision. Those in-school days are a really good way, I've seen, of governors getting to understand a little bit more about what's going on. The other thing on there is the first point, which is about away days. Now, away days, again, are so important for you as governors to get that sense of what the vision, to support, help write the vision and shape the vision for the school. And we were again talking, I've got an away day in 2 weeks' time, at the beginning of this term. It's a good time to have your conference, really, because all these things are happening now for us as governors and for you in your schools or settings. So we've got an away day planned where we'll have trustees, members, governors, head teachers, all looking at what the priorities are for the school, all checking that our vision is still the same, and all saying, is this what we want to do? Are these the things that we really want to hold as our priorities? And some of those things you'll hear repeated again and again. And induction is such a key point for you. Do you have an induction portfolio that you can give all your new governors, which explains what those statutory responsibilities are, which explains what the specific and additional roles might be, but also gives a real clear steer about what the shape is of the work you're going to be doing as a governor. Next slide, please. And I think for me, this is absolutely important about the SEND governor, because the SEND governor has that role, as Francesca said, to look a bit deeper, to ask those questions, to spend a bit more time in the school and setting and with the SENCO. So I've talked again about some of the things that are on this slide that the SENCO will want to do. And that visit is key. In some schools, it may be once a year. I think they recommend a minimum of once a year. In most of my schools and settings, it may be that it's once a term if you're lucky, or it's a visit once a term and once a year, and then it might be a phone conversation or an email with the SENCO, so that you're catching up and become part of that team, if you like, that works for families and children with SEND. So one of the things that our school, one of the schools that I work with does, is that the SENCO will prepare the agenda for the governor. In other words, send them a report before the visit. You know, these are the areas you might want to see. This is what you're going to see when you come into school. And so that the SEND governor has that chance to really get to see how that works and what it feels like for the children. With a bit of luck, they're going to have an opportunity to meet pupils, if that's an appropriate thing to do, and observe practice, with remembering that you're not an inspector or an expert in teaching, but you're there to see what you've been told at the meetings. One of the things that my schools all do, and I think this is really important, is when they're having reviews of school practice, they're also inviting governors to be part of that. And if there is a whole school review, then governors can be part of seeing how schools look at their own practice. And so that when they have their own review, that again is built into the process. I think the last point I put on this slide, on the previous slide, which is about getting ready for Ofsted. And all of us have to prepare ourselves for Ofsted, whether we like it or not. And if I could have the next slide, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. So I don't want you to think that everything we do should be about Ofsted, and we shouldn't do everything with Ofsted in our thoughts, but we are unwise not to check how they will judge us, because that is how we will be judged externally. And I think it's worth saying this. If you haven't read it, have a look at the new handbook. It was updated in July 2022, and it's certainly a long document, but it's a good read, colleagues. I'm a bit sad to admit that I find an Ofsted document a good read. And I suppose in the past I would have said that maybe it's, you know, it's about something that you helped go to sleep now. And it's not now. It is actually much more worth your while spending some time on. And so what I've done for you there on that last slide is the last 4 points, the number points there, tell you the sections and the numbers where you should really look at what Ofsted are asking you to look at for SEND, and what you need to know that is in place in your school, so that you can come back and say, you know, Ofsted are going to do this. Are we going to have the opportunity to do the same thing? As I said, I think it's not about being Ofsted inspectors, and we're not that, and never want to be, but it is being prepared. And finally, I'm hoping I've rushed through this presentation for you so that you'll have time for questions if you've got questions to ask us. My last slide really sums up some of the things that I've said. My presentation is very much about asking questions, and it's about keeping on asking those questions and finding out ways so that you know you've got the right answers, because that's the hardest thing for us as governors. Sometimes we can ask questions, but we don't know if the wool's being pulled over our eyes. So it is about trying to make sure we triangulate or we substantiate as much as we can by looking at the range of evidence that we see. So my favorite quote here is the one in the middle, probably. He who asks a question may be a fool for 5 minutes, but he who does not ask a question remains a fool forever. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Well, thank you very much, Francesca and Jenny, for a huge amount of information, helpful information, fitted into 25 minutes. We do have 5 minutes left for questions, so I'll just jump straight in. Jenny, can I first of all ask, Can you suggest any ways that governors could involve or have involved parents in their audit of SEND or review of SEND?
I think some schools already do that, and if they have a very close parent committee, they might get parent governors to be involved in the school reviews, which is a good thing to do. The other thing that one of our governors' body does regularly is to have a governors' table at parents' evenings. And COVID, I'm afraid, got in the way of that, didn't it? Because it stopped a lot of that face-to-face feedback with parents. But for governors to really hear what it's like for a parent with a child with SEND, it's an excellent thing to do. I think what governors have to be prepared to do is very carefully not say that they know the answer to everything, because they won't. But if they say, I'll find out that answer and then get back to parents, it's so important that parents feel that they are listened to and somebody will get back to them.
Are there any other organisations that can provide help and support to parents that isn't the school, essentially?
Well, there should be through the local authority. So once a parent has a child with SEND, the local authority, I think, still has to provide that parent advice service, which is supposed to be an independent advice for parents and support for parents, which takes them through that process. And there are often SEND groups and the SEND forum. Most local authorities have SEND forums where parents can get involved and can meet other parents with SEND. And I would certainly hope that the school will signpost those parents to that kind of level of support if they haven't had it already. Quite often, Ollie, it's those parents will have already found, most parents, or the most, I don't know, I suppose, eloquent or educated parents will have already done that. The parents we need to help are the parents who never do it, who never ask the questions and aren't there. And I think we as governors need to actually find ways of meeting and getting hold of those parents and finding out ways to get to know them.
We've had a question here about SATs and how pupils with SEND, how whether it's essentially right that they're completing SATs. I mean, some pupils are going to be very good, perform very well in SATs, others perhaps not. What's your view on that, and essentially how it might affect judgment of the school by Ofsted?
I think maybe in the past that's always been a parent's worry and maybe a governor's worry that a school that has a large number of pupils with SEND, its results will be lower because those children won't do as well in the SATs. But actually, if you look at Ofsted, and Ofsted says it now very, very clearly, that their progress is good for all children, specifically vulnerable and those with special educational needs. And it's that expression, particularly for those vulnerable children and those with SEND, is right through the framework. And Ofsted would not judge a school if those children are having their needs met and if they're demonstrating that they're making good progress against their starting points. So I think that's what any school has to look at, and that's what governors have to ask. So when the head teacher report, I mean, most of us will have had meetings already this term where we've been looking at the results from last year and the SATs results. Those SATs results should highlight not just the results for one particular group of children, but for all children, so that governors understand how well the different groups do within their school. And that's an important thing for us to understand.
Excellent. We've got a question here about resources from Caroline, and she's saying that there's been an increase in the numbers of pupils with SEND in education, health and care plans, but not a corresponding increase in the staffing resource to deal with this. Is there a way that governors can take the lead on this and make sure that the staff are able to have the time to deal with this in school and manage the administration that comes with SEND?
Is this for me again?
Yeah, I think Francesca. I mean,
Francesca, do you want to answer it, or do you want me to carry on?
I'm happy for you to carry on there.
Thank you. Well, resources is the big issue, isn't it? If a child has an EHCP plan, that should be costed, and it should be, the resources for that should be put in for the local authority. Most schools say that the resources they're given doesn't cover the whole amount it means. So that is then about how we can look and work in partnership with each other to maybe look at sharing resources across schools, and trusts are ably placed to do that. And some trusts, for example, are setting up provision for pupils with SEND, which is shared across the trust, but then is funded across that so that they can share those resources. And that is a very effective way of doing it. It's more difficult when you're a small school, if you suddenly find that you've taken in a large number of pupils, or you've got more pupils coming in with SEND than you planned. I think governor's role in that is to hold the local authority to account. I mean, local authority SEN teams are also incredibly overstretched. And I know at the moment in our own area where, you know, the head teachers are working with the local SEN team to try and address some of those problems, because it's becoming an increasing issue. And probably governors do need to get involved in that. And it's through the head teacher report and through talking to the head that they'll do that. Whether or not they can ask for individual meetings with the SEN team, you can always ask, but not that you'll get.
Well, thank you very much. I'm aware that we've actually just gone 1 minute over the allotted time for our session, but thank you very much for fitting so much useful and vital information into the 30 minutes. Just to conclude, just a reminder that the session will be available to watch back. We hope to send that to you by the end of the week, so you'll be able to go over the points raised and share with your colleagues. As I mentioned at the start, the session is CPD certified, so if you would like a certificate, remember to fill in your details on the webinar survey that comes after the session. Please do check our website and make sure you follow us on social media to keep up to date with information about our future events and webinars. And thank you again for your attendance, and we hope to see you at another session tomorrow. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Francesca and Jenny. And have a good rest of your evening. Thank you very much.